Welcome to the Round 6 Podcast, a weekly roundtable discussion featuring a variety of automotive subjects, interviews, special guests, and stories, hosted by the Round 6 Gearheads, Brian Stupski, Brad King, Alex Welsh, and Eric Hibbs. On episode 15, the Gearheads explore the science of fasteners and talk hot rods with the Executive Vice President of ARP, Bob Florine. Hey, welcome to the Round 6 Podcast. I'm Brian.
I'm Brad.
I'm Alex.
And where a lesser man, or shall we say just a less mature me from, say, 2 or 3 episodes ago, may have gone the easy route with a bunch of hardware puns, I'll instead just welcome you to an hour in the fastener lane with our guest tonight, Mr. Bob Florine, who is one of the owners and the head of Automotive Racing Products, a company you may know as being one of the major suppliers of fasteners and hardware for everything from Formula One to Riddler Award winners and everything in between. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule, and welcome to the show. How are you tonight, sir?
Hey, Bob.
Hey, everyone.
Bob.
Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. Glad to be on the show. Thanks.
We are glad to have you, sir.
As to your comment about me being the head of the company, I am one of the owners, but not the head by any means. We're a big company. We have 300 employees, and it really, I mean, you hear this all the time. It takes a team, but it really does take a team to make our company work. So I just wanted to say that.
That's an outstanding thing to say, and thank you so much for clarifying that. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. I was out today in San Bernardino at Gabe's Upholstery, and we were working on a new project with a good friend of mine, Steve Strope from Pure Vision, and talking about a coming project that I'm going to be working on. I just finished one. Well, it isn't even finished yet, and I'm already starting on a new one. So it shows you how sick I am. But yeah, everything went well, and glad to be with you guys. I truly am.
Oh, thank you.
Likewise, we've been looking forward to this. I suppose the logical place to start is, how did your career with ARP begin?
Well, it was a long time ago. It was actually 42 years ago this last May.
Wow.
And I worked in the sales industry at the time, and my roommate was working for ARP. And we were young, and he was still in his party mode. I had pretty much worked my way mostly out of it. And the founder of the company was coming by and looking for him on a regular basis, wondering where he was, why he wasn't at work. So we built a rapport, and I said, well, you know, I've always wanted to be involved in the racing industry. Why don't you give me a shot? And so I went to work for him, and I started out sweeping floors and driving a delivery truck and a machinist trainee, even though the intent, both with him and myself, was to work into a sales position within the company. He wanted to make sure I learned the business from the ground up. And so I spent the next 6 years learning the business from the ground up before I ever made a sales call, believe it or not. And well, it was the best decision. Way to do it. It really was the best decision, bar none. Agreed with it wholeheartedly. And, you know, I can still to this day go out and set up and run equipment, any of the equipment in the business. And so there's nothing like knowing your product inside and out if you're going to sell it. So that's been my primary responsibility, is the sales and marketing end of the company. And eventually it got to a point where I became an owner. So, you know, for all you youngsters out there, because I know you're just loaded with youngsters in your audience.
Hopefully young and driven people, that'd be good, you know.
And nose to the grindstone, yes. Starting at the bottom isn't a bad thing. Coming in and demanding that you'd be hired into a position of management or leadership right off of the bat is no good for you or the company. So that
Awesome.
would be my moral for the day, gentlemen.
So after 42 years of being with the company, what has it been like to see the growth that ARP has had? And I think I researched it. I think in '68, Gary started the company. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. He started that in the garage as a nighttime venture, a means of supplementing his income. He was the foreman of an aerospace company during the day, and then he'd come home and work until he couldn't stand up anymore at night, just to make a supplemental income because he had a young family to support. And, that's just the way people did things back in that generation.
Yeah. I can't imagine the growth that you have seen from starting out in something that small and limited employees to where you're at least at over 300 employees now.
Over 300, yeah.
Wow.
To give you an idea of the growth, when I started there, the first year that I worked there, our gross sales for the entire year was $110,000.
Wow.
And that was the best that it had ever done. So there was a big party, at the end of the year to celebrate that fact. I can tell you that last year we did well in excess of 50 million.
Nice.
That's a nice jump.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't exactly overnight. That would be awesome. I mean,
No, but
that'd be the greatest Christmas party ever.
A steady growth curve. Every year since I've been there, we've never had less than 7% growth a year.
Wow.
That gets a lot harder, I guarantee you.
Hey, Bob, do you guys have a lot of competition, or are you guys kind of a one?
Yes, we have lots of competition. Don't get in the business, please. No, no. Honestly, we really found a niche here, and no, we don't really have a qualified competitor. We have in the past had some competitors, but they've all gone by the wayside. Sorry, folks out there, for my dog. I'm sorry. We have in the past had some competitors. The last qualified competitor we had was a company called A1, and they were owned by a multinational conglomerate. And there was a lot of money behind the company. They just never could make it stick, though. They never could really make any headway against us. And the corporate company just finally said, fold it up. We're tired of, spending the money we're spending here trying to get market share and getting nowhere. So they just folded it up.
Do you think they just couldn't match your quality, or they just didn't match the diversity of product that you guys had?
It was some of both. They did have a very good quality compared to most of the competitors we've had in the past. But still, when you look at companies like SPS Industries, that was a big name when we started really going after the automotive aftermarket. When we started going after that automotive aftermarket, Standard Press Steel, SPS Industries, was the big player there. And we continually were able to outperform them and outprice them at every turn. And that still holds true to this day. We've become better and better at manufacturing product, not only making it a better product, but also doing it more cost effectively.
Going over, Alex is our research king here, and he provided us that, as far as like the quality of your product goes, which obviously speaks for itself. I mean, you guys are used in everything from OEM to, NHRA, IndyCar, NASCAR, aerospace. Wow, for crying out loud, I don't think there's anything you guys don't touch.
Formula One.
Yeah, there really isn't. I say from go-karts to Formula One, offshore racing boats to pylon racing planes, and up in space. We do work for a couple of private companies, we shall say, because I'm bound by non-disclosure agreements. So our stuff is actually, even to this day, going up into space, and we still do aerospace work as far as defense work and that type of thing as well. And we do a lot of various military work aside from flying. There's on the ground stuff that we do as well. So very diversified. We also Budweiser. They were having a problem with breaking the bolts that hold their stamping dies on, that they stamp the lids of their cans with. So we developed a product for them, and they haven't had any breakage since. Hormel Foods, stainless steel product for their food line. Oil industry, bolts that hold the drilling heads on, because that goes into some really foul, corrosive stuff when they're drilling, not to mention very large loads on the bolts as well. And we've been able to build them product that doesn't fail. Fire departments, local transportation departments, you name it. You know what? And most of that work has come from guys, racers, that have day jobs because they have to support their habit, and they see a bolt problem at work and they go, "Hey, I know a company that can fix that," and that's how most of that has come to us. Believe it or not, awesome. I mean, it's amazing.
If somebody comes to you with a problem and says, "Hey, Bob, we got with this, say our lid machine, we're trying to stamp these caps out, it keeps breaking the bolts," do they pretty much turn you guys loose on it and allow you guys to fix it, or do they go, "We think this, here's an engineering drawing, can you make this bolt?" Or do they give you guys the ability to go in there and kind of design and work it?
Yeah, it's some of both. A lot of it is convincing their engineering staff to just trust us, let us do an analysis of the situation and design a product for the application, to tell you the truth. Yeah. And once we convince our engineering staff to turn us loose and let us do our thing, we fix their problem. If the engineering staff gets too involved in the project, it tends to draw it out further.
Yeah.
It's more of a trial and error thing than, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I always kind of wondered in a case like for you guys, say a Formula One team comes over and they've got an issue that they're working through that's unique and proprietary to their own team.
Well, Formula One's a whole different thing.
Yeah, I was going to say,
tell you the truth,
how do they do it?
Yeah, we've tried to tell them, look, we can save you guys a lot of money if you just do this. No. Just build it to the engineering drawing we supplied you. We don't care how much it costs. Just do that. They're more concerned with delivery times than they are with cost. I guess they just have too much money.
Yeah, I got to think with those guys. You've got a Formula One engine that turns 18,000 RPMs. I mean, how many life cycles are you putting on that bolt during a race?
Yeah, well, they used to be turning 18 to 20,000 RPM, even up to 22. But these days, they've really limited the RPM on these things. They've got 21 races a year, and they've only got 3 engines to do it on. So,
wow,
they've dropped the RPMs way down on those things. It's around 15,000 RPM now, which is no slouch. But it makes a big difference in the life of the engine. Believe it or not, it truly does. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's truly amazing the things that we do for them. And unfortunately, again, because of non-disclosure agreements, I can't disclose any of that to you. But it is truly amazing some of the things that they're doing as far as development and design work. It's truly amazing. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, a lot of the times I'm a Formula One fan, so you watch the races and you hear about some of the new things that they're doing. And when a fan finally hears about it, it's probably about 5 years old. They've probably been developing it forever.
Oh, yeah.
You're the last to know.
Yeah. It's something they'll never use again if they're telling you what it is.
Can you imagine, like, Ferrari's extra parts room, what that thing would be like? It would just got to be amazing. I mean, some of the things that they tried that didn't work to their expectations.
Truly, there's a guy somewhere on the internet that makes speaker systems that incorporate Ferrari exhaust, Ferrari Formula One exhaust, and I don't know if it's designs that didn't work or designs that have been retired, but they truly are beautiful works of art. Now, of course, they're not exactly in the average guy's budget, but
Yeah.
and I have no idea how they sound, but they look gorgeous.
I just wonder if there's a Chinese knockoff of those out there where you can buy that. And although thinking about that now, an interesting question for you. I know it's relatively prevalent in all the aftermarket, anything aftermarket. Usually, how even the OEMs deal with it. Do you guys have to deal at all with counterfeit parts or forgeries hitting the market?
Yes, we do. We have to go after it aggressively all the time. Our lawyers' fees and legal fees, I assure you, are not a small thing. And if you don't aggressively pursue it, there's a thing called sleeping on your rights. So you can lose your rights if you don't pursue it. So it's necessary to get on top of and pursue this stuff aggressively all the time. Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to take one of those counterfeits that they say is your part, but it's not, and run it through your durability and all the other tests that you guys put your product through to see how it stacks up. It's got to be junk.
It's not even close. It's a lot of this stuff you can look at and you go, oh my God.
You can visually see the problems. Huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
What if we start our own F1 team, okay, and we build it strictly using counterfeit parts? We call it Team Push Broom.
Straight 5 bolts all through it.
Team Push Broom sounds like an appropriate
grade 5 bolts.
Yeah, grade 5.
We're going to go through
the bolts to stretch. That's how our chassis works. It has to stretch.
Yeah, we have to push it everywhere we go.
We'll use all three of our season engines in the first 4 laps. It's going to be the greatest team ever, man.
Well, I guess there's starting money. If you could actually get the thing to start the race, you probably get something for that. So there's that. I mean, typically NASCAR, you like Daytona 500. If you start the race, you're guaranteed at least $250,000. So it's probably not a bad idea for a venture. I mean,
years ago they used to have that term "start and park," and you don't see as much of that anymore. The guys that are actually getting out there and qualifying 43rd, they'll get out there and try. They may not go very far, but they'll at least get out there and try. Before they would blatantly go out there, start the race, do a couple laps, park the car.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
true.
You don't see that anymore. I kind of wonder if
No, you really don't, because one, there's just too many drivers trying to break into that market.
Yeah.
So they always want to make their impact as much as they can. But also, sponsors are a lot more demanding now than they used to be.
Yeah.
They want performance for their product. So
they want to see that logo go around the track a lot.
Are not backwards. They're not these backwards Southern boys. They've brought a lot of Formula One people and engineers into their teams, and they've really made huge strides.
Well, you think about a normally aspirated 5.8 liter motor making over 800 horsepower. That was the last I heard was over 800. It might be more than that now.
And it's not even a roller cam. It's a solid.
And what's even more impressive,
that alone right there is impressive.
They have individual timing in each cylinder due to their cam profiles and so forth. I was fortunate enough to spend, I don't know, somewhere in the 8 to 10 years of the last years of Smokey's life, traveling around and doing shows and going to NASCAR races and so forth. And spending some time with him and listening to him and some of the NASCAR engine builders talk, I was just floored at the technology that they were getting out of a simple push rod engine, running at the RPMs they were. And the whole individual timing thing through cam profiles and so forth was just mind-blowing. and they could even tune that to RPMs to some degree. And I don't know all of the mechanics of it. I certainly don't have a photographic memory. But listening to Smokey and some of these engine builders talk about what they were doing in there was just beyond my comprehension at the time. He had some of the greatest stories too.
I can imagine.
That guy had a full life, I guarantee you.
That guy, yeah. One of the most memorable things I've ever done. We got to meet Smokey at SEMA, and it was a couple years before he passed away. And he was doing some work with Prolong, so he was in the Prolong booth. Yeah. And we always laughed about it because Linda Vaughn was also doing promotional work too. And Linda's great; she's phenomenal. Yeah. Well, Linda's line was way long, and there was hardly anybody in Smokey's line. So we got a chance to sit and talk with Smokey for a while. And what a cool guy! We had to ask him about the Chevelle, the 7/8 Chevelle, and he told us a bunch of stories about, or a couple things about it that I'd never read anywhere else in any of the articles. And so I would have loved to just spent hours and hours just talking to that guy.
I'm sure he told you it wasn't actually 7/8 either.
Right? Yeah.
He
just it was just a Chevelle with a shave and a haircut everywhere, pretty much.
Well, yeah, there were, little things that made a huge difference. He tell you about the little aero treatment he did to the roof back by the rear window.
It kind of like its own little mini spoiler back in the back, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that car was absolutely loaded with stuff, and it was.
It was.
But he was a character, man. What a neat guy. And I've read his book a couple of times, and it's a good read. It travels all over the place, and it's a little disjointed at times, but it's worth it. It's worth reading.
And he introduced me to some of the most interesting people I've ever met as well. He introduced me to Colonel Bill Strupp, the guy that rode all the rocket sleds.
All right. Okay.
Back in the development days of NASA.
Yeah.
The guy that jumped out of the weather balloon.
I did some research on that guy. That guy was a badass.
Oh, yeah.
He was a doctor also.
Yes.
Yeah, he had a PhD, a sharp guy. I work at Edwards Air Force Base, and on the way out of the South Gate, you could still see remnants of the concrete ties that were part of that rocket sled track.
Mm-hmm.
And you pass right over. Every day when I go to work, I pass over those things. And I always think about that guy, rocket sled. Not only the acceleration checks that he did, it was also the deceleration checks. I think that were probably more brutal than the acceleration checks.
Absolutely. Do you know that he spent 1 month before he rode that sled the first time going home to his domicile on base and blindfolded himself for 1 month before he rode that because he was sure he was going to be blind after he rode it. And he rode it anyway.
I think on one of the deceleration checks, he was blind for a period of time. It wasn't, like 30. He was blind for a what? It wasn't like weeks and months, but he was blind for a period of time.
Yes,
not knowing if your vision's going to come back.
Temporary blindness, yeah. But he was sure he was going to be blind. That's why he spent a month learning his way around his living quarters, blindfolded.
Wow.
That takes huge courage.
Yeah. There was a lot of mavericks in the business back then that people don't really think much about now, but they are the guys that paved the way for the entire industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. They just don't build a lot of guys like that anymore, do they?
No. Well, nowadays in the business, you can simulate a lot of things using a lot of computer modeling, and so there isn't as much.
You don't
danger.
have to brutalize yourself like you did back in those days.
Yeah. Before we started talking, I went and grabbed my ARP catalog, and I got to say, whoever put this catalog together, I have to give them huge kudos. The first 30 pages of this catalog are probably the best reading in any catalog you will ever buy. It's basically almost a college textbook in what you will learn.
There is, a wealth of technological.
I love it. I'm sitting there flipping through it right now. I'm just blown away at it. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, we had Dr. Ken Foster, Dr. Russell Sherman, and Carol Smith, who you guys will probably be familiar with. Rest in peace, Carol. Miss you. And Smokey. We're all involved in a lot of that information, as well as us internally. But yeah, that's stuff that we've put together over the years, and is a wealth of information to a guy considering the proper installation and use of fasteners just in general.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm sorry about the birds in the background. I covered them up. That should have shut them up, but
we have that effect on.
Yeah.
You should hear what happens with flightless waterfowl. It's pretty crazy.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's just a wealth of information in this first 30 pages.
Yeah.
It truly is. And not only there, on our websites, we even have a lot more. We have a website just for instructions for all of our product, and we update that on a regular basis. So it's a good idea that you refer to that, just to make sure that you've got the latest updated information. But how many times have we sent something off to an engine builder and he goes through it and he gets it ready, but he doesn't return the paperwork or information with you?
Yeah.
To you with the product. So it's always good to go back and refer to that for torquing procedures and levels and lubricants and everything else. So
I remember the first ARP product I ever bought. I bought a set of main studs for a small block I was putting together. And I remember reading the instructions, oil the threads, put them in hand tight. I'm like, what? There's no way, I couldn't believe it, but that's the way they are. I mean, it's the way it
but
is.
a stud, you're just pulling it from both ends. If you tried to tighten it into the block, and if you didn't have a bottoming feature on the stud where it actually bottomed on the bottom of the stud into the material of the block into a blind hole, if you didn't have that and you tightened the stud into the block, so you're tightening it against the run-out thread of the stud, and you're tightening it against the run-out thread at the top of the thread in the block, you're actually tipping that stud over to one side, because those are imperfect threads. So it just tips everything over to one side. Then you have 17 of those in a small block, and they're all tipped over to one side or another. Trying to put your cylinder head on would not be an easy thing, for one. But even more important, though, is that you're putting a high stress on the last thread, and threads are the weakest link of a fastener. So you're putting a high stress on that last thread as well. But when you just install them in hand tight, and we actually recommend that you back it off like 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn once it stops threading in by hand. Then you're pulling on that thread evenly, and it pulls on the stud from both ends, which is how a stud is supposed to work. So, and it also preserves the threads in your block. So a lot of advantages to running a stud, but it is important to install them properly.
I got a question as far as the torquing things. What caused the change from let's say torquing a set of rod bolts? You go, okay, I'm going to do them 40, 55, 60, whatever, and it went from a torque wrench deal to a stretch gauge. What caused that to change?
Well, we've always recommended a stretch gauge, and I'll tell you why, especially on connecting rod bolts. One, it's arguably the most critical joint in an automotive engine. Two, you can get to both ends of the bolt generally. Some aftermarket aluminum rods and race rods and whatever, you can't necessarily get to both ends of the bolt, but generally you can get to both ends of the bolt. So measuring the elongation or stretch in a bolt is empirical. It is a mathematical problem and will repeat every time. If you install a bolt by stretch to a given number, it will have a given clamping force every time, 100% of the time. Torque is a variable. It's based on how much friction there is. And not only that, how accurate your torque wrench is. So torque is a variable, stretch is empirical, and that's the reason why we always recommend stretch.
Okay. So how did you guys? Okay, I mean, there's one of those that's a little more scientific than just guessing. I mean, where do you know, is there a certain amount per inch or inch and a half or 2 inches or how? I mean,
Well,
this is kind of a weird deal.
It's based on a bolt's length, diameter, tensile strength, and when I say diameter, you can have multiple diameters in a bolt. So it's something that's designed around each bolt. But basically, it's mean diameter and its length and tensile strength are the main factors there. And then we're looking for a figure of 75% of yield. If you want to know what yield is the point where a fastener or bolt is in an elastic range until it is yielded. Once it's yielded, it becomes what's called plastic. As long as it's in an elastic range of the material, you can release your torque and the bolt will return to its original freestanding length, and it's like nothing had ever happened to it. If you reach or surpass yield, then the bolt is into a plastic range and will never be the same again. It's like stretching a spring out, say a throttle spring. You pull on the throttle spring under the yield point and it just returns back every time to where it was. But if you actually stretch that past yield, then it does not return to its original shape. Some of those coils are separated and won't go back to being not separated anymore. That's because you've gone beyond the yield of that spring. And fasteners are springs, basically. They're very strong springs. So if you have a load trying to separate your cylinder head from your block, say, of 10,000 pounds, and you put a fastener in and load it up to 10,001 pounds, and let's just say there's no thermal properties involved, that it's just load, that fastener will never feel any load at all until it surpasses 10,001 pounds. And then it'll only feel, say it goes to 10,002 pounds, it'll only feel that 1 pound load. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So ideally, you want a installed preload that is higher than the load that'll ever be used to try and separate that joint. So when we design a fastener for an application, our rule of thumb is we like to see a 2-to-1 if we can get there. Now, you can't always get there because you have constraints such as material strength in the components you're trying to fasten. Say an aluminum head type situation, you can't generally go 2-to-1 in many cases because the aluminum either not of quality enough, or there's not enough material thickness, so to speak, to prevent it from distorting if you were to go to a 2-to-1 type situation. So you have to back that down some. But you always want to make sure you're going to exceed whatever the maximum projected load is. And then also with aluminum, you also have to factor in the thermal properties, which I brought up a little earlier. So your typical aluminum cylinder head stretches between 15 and 20 thousandths, the fastener between 15 and 20 thousandths during use. It moves a lot when you heat it up.
So this might be kind of a dopey question, but I figure this might be fun for our listeners too. So in a case of having to design a custom fastener for whatever application, you've got to engineer this fastener to handle the load and perform its duty that you're obviously trying to design it for. My question is, do you run into situations where you have to almost develop an entirely new metallurgy for an application, or do you kind of have a go-to, like a go-to pile of things where you say, oh, we're going to use this particular material? Do you ever find yourself having to say, we need to come up with something entirely new for this?
There may come a day when we do, but no, not currently.
Okay.
We have a go-to group of materials that we use for particular situations. It's generally a matter of getting enough strength. And as I said, with aluminum being so prominent in the racing industry, getting enough strength and having enough flex in the fastener or spring-like action in the fastener to make it work without damaging the components you're bolting together or clamping together. So we have to, as we go up in strength, we have to also keep in mind we need to make those fasteners more flexible, more able to act like a spring, because as you're strengthening them, materials that you're strengthening tend to get stiffer. So you need to figure out a way to make it more flexible so that it doesn't damage the components you're bolting together, yet carry the clamping loads to prevent it from separating during use. I know that is a little hard to grasp, but that's the reality of it.
Right.
So sometimes you really have to walk a tightrope there because you're trying to get more strength for the application. And a lot of these, supercharged, turbocharged, especially turbocharged, because you also not only have a high strength and an issue with the material you're trying to clamp together, you don't want it collapsing and distorting to the point where it ruins the cylinder head, so to speak. But you also have high thermal properties as well. So all those things have to be factored in. And it's amazing. You look at, just say NASCAR, for instance. A lot of the cylinder heads that they're using there, cylinder head fasteners that they're using there now, are typically 3/8, some as small as 5/16 in diameter for the cylinder head studs.
Because there's more of them, or why are they smaller?
There is more of them, but they're higher strength materials. And not necessarily the threads being that smaller diameter, but the area between the threads being that smaller diameter. In some cases, the threads are smaller diameter as well. But
I never would have thought that.
Yeah, I mean, think about how cool that is, though, because you're saving a ton of weight by using a smaller fastener. That's, oh my God, that's nuts.
Well, you're also giving way to a lot of possibilities of moving things around in the cylinder.
Yep.
If you know what I mean.
Well, plus it's close to stuff. You get stuff close to valve springs or whatever, where all of a sudden you get to have a little tiny head on the thing because you can't get anything in there because something's in the way of it.
Well,
port positions and things of that nature too. So.
Wow.
Yeah, some heads you can only port a particular amount because you're right into one of the stud bosses.
Exactly.
So yeah. Make the thing a little bit smaller diameter, gives you a little bit more space to move that port over.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I never would have thought that, but that's clever. Hey, I always noticed in the last couple of decades, especially specifically with GM and the LS motors, we started hearing a term called torque to yield, one-time use bolts. Now, is that because GM started figuring out the stretch as well, or did they go to a different material to where they got the strength that they needed, they got the lightweight that they needed, knowing that when the engine ever got rebuilt, well, these fasteners are all disposable fasteners? Why did they go to that direction?
Yeah, what brought them to that decision typically is a couple of things. One being cost. So if they could design a fastener where you could use all of the strength of it to get the job done, instead of a part that needed to be stronger and therefore more expensive, that you were only taking the 75% of yield. There's that aspect of it. But more importantly is when they went to the multi-torque fixtures where they started torquing all the bolts at once, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They have these big fixtures that come down and torque all of the cylinder head bolts at once. So it's mainly a function of that. It's a torque angle of deflection process with those big torquing heads. So it applies a initial torque, and then it measures an angle of turn, and they know that every fastener then is installed at or above yield. It's generally considered 90 to 120% of yield is where their installed tensils are at.
I always wonder, say somebody is in a rush, puts something back together, uses a torque to yield fastener a second time, say a head bolt or a head stud. What's going to happen to that stud? If it does fail, what part of that stud is going to fail? Is it going to just
it depends on
tensile strength? It'll break itself or shear itself?
It will. I mean, again, to go back to my throttle spring analogy, think if you used a throttle spring that had been yielded. What happens there?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily
come back to the same number. Yeah.
But it doesn't work properly.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get full throttle out of that carburetor anymore because the spring isn't working properly. Well, it's similar type situation. I mean, it just isn't going to work the way it was designed to work. In a lot of cases they're going to break it. I mean, when you yield something, that's not the breaking point. When you look at a fastener being loaded up to the point of yield, it's going up the chart on about a 45-degree angle. When you actually reach yield, it noses over and starts rounding off, and it doesn't break there. It'll actually start down on that curve before it actually gets to the point where it breaks.
Wow.
But it'll be considerably longer than it was before you started applying the load. Say, something on the order of about 4.5 inches, typical small block Chevy head bolt. If you went into yield on that head bolt, didn't break it, just took it into yield, you're probably talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 50 thousandths in that range. Elongation or how much it grows in length compared to what it really was before you started applying that load.
Mm-hmm.
So look at it this way. We started undercutting our head stud kits for the small block Chevy way back in the mid 70s. Because Jim Hall came to us and said, look, Jim Hall of Chaparral Cars came to us and said, look, these small short side exhaust studs are only 2.5 inches long and they are too stiff. And when you apply the correct amount of torque to them, they're only stretching about 2 to 2.5 thousandths. So if your gasket takes a set at all, and generally, anything except a solid steel gasket is going to take a set, then you've lost all the load off of your short side studs in these small block Chevys. So he explained it to us and showed us how it was happening. So he said, you got to undercut these studs in order to make them more flexible. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is that the gasket takes a set, whatever. And if you can imagine 2000s being the cause, as Jim Hall was telling us, of a head gasket failure, imagine what 25 to 50 thousandths would do. I mean, you're really lifting that head on that thing.
Yeah.
So that's why some bolts then have got the machine that tapers down where it could be at 1/2 inch at the biggest spot and narrowed down to say 3/8 of it in the smaller spot. Is that why it's like that?
Yeah, pretty much in general. Yeah, that's a lot of it. Some of it is that on, say, factory-style head bolts and a lot of that type of thing, a lot of aftermarket general bolts in general, they will, instead of being 7/16 all the way down to where the thread starts, there'll be 7/16 for a small portion of it, and then it goes down to what would be terminology, we call it a TD diameter, or a thread diameter, TD, thread diameter. It would be roughly the pitch diameter, or about the medium level as you go follow a thread flank, it would be about the medium level between the top and bottom of the thread. That's an area what is typically referred to as the pitch. And that is an approximate level of diameter that you need before rolling or extruding a thread onto the bolt. So a lot of companies will run, especially commercial companies, but even competitors for us in the automotive industry, will run them to, and we have some product that way too, we'll run them to the TD diameter in order to save a process, save a grinding process. So they forge that right into the bolt, and then all they have to do is run it through the bolt threader, and they've saved one weight, they saved another process, and they generally do that. Our competitors and commercial bolts are all done prior to heat treating the part. So they just come off of the bolt maker and into a thread rolling attachment, and then they're heat treated afterwards. Now we do our head bolts to where they have a big thread diameter length on them, but we're doing it for flexibility. But we're grinding that in after the heat treatment and before the thread rolling process.
So there was a reason. You got a game plan here. It wasn't just
it
was a plan for it.
It's done willy-nilly. Correct. That's right.
I always wondered during the manufacturing of a bolt, whether it's made from a blank of rod or wire, whatever it's made out of. Say you're running something that's super, super strong, say like air met or something that's really, really strong. When the heading process happens, how do you do that? If you've got a bolt that's made out of a material that's got such a high tensile strength and you're about ready to hammer this thing and put a head on the end of it, how do you do it with a bolt that's got that kind of strength to it?
Yeah, we do it one of two ways. And we have a lot of cold heading equipment in our plant, and they are what you call progressive headers. They are called progressive because you progressively form the part by smacking it more than one time. In our case, it's 5 stations and 4 dies, 4 hammers. So it's hitting it 4 times to form it into its shape. So we do some of those materials, and it's called cold heading because you're not heating the material up before you put it in the machine to head it. So we do some of those parts cold heading on these progressive headers. The majority of our product is actually done this way. It's very cost effective. We can cold head parts at a rate of 35 to 40 forgings per minute. Oh. The other way of doing things is to hot head the part. Now, the cold headed part, by the way, is done on we put like 500, 700, maybe even 1,000-pound coils of wire in front of the machine, and it uncoils the wire and straightens it out before it goes into the machine. And then, the 5th station, by the way, was cut off, which is the first process. It cuts it off to length, and then it progressively forms it. The other way of doing it is hot heading, and you would take bars of stock, and you would cut it off to length, and then you deburr it, and then you chamfer it, and then you send it over for hot heading. And then you have to put it into a induction heater, which is basically some coils that you put the part into, and it's not, but it's similar to if you were microwaving the part. In other words, it only takes about a minute to heat the part up, glowing red, almost transparent. You've seen parts at some point that whether it's at a forge or at steel manufacturing plants, you've seen where the material is red hot, almost white, and in some cases even almost transparent looking. Mm-hmm. So we can heat that part up to that level in 1 minute using these induction heaters. And then you grab it with a pair of pliers, needle nose pliers that have been bent to have a round grip on them so you can grab a round part with it. You put it into the hot header, and then with both hands you press the start buttons in a start cycle. And it's about a 300-ton press. Come down and slam it, and it forms it in one shot. Now that process, just the hot heading one at a time process, takes about a minute or so to heat up the part and about another minute to actually head the part. So it's a very slow and costly process compared to the cold heading. So we cold head it if we possibly can, but sometimes we have to hot them if the diameter is too large or if the length is too long. Now, when we bring in a cold header, we buy these progressive headers at auctions and we rebuild them. We're typically buying a progressive header for anywhere from $750,000 to about $1.5 million, and it takes about 3 years to rebuild it the way we want it rebuilt, because we're building it better than it was new and strengthening it and getting rid of areas where they're weak, so we can head these tougher materials at a cost of about $750,000 to $1 million over a 3-year period. And then it takes about another 6 months plus and about another $750,000 to tool them up. So we finally get these things online, but we can head these tougher materials, and we do multi-phase and Aeromet and some of these tougher materials, Asteloid, Greek Asteloid, so forth. We do these tougher materials. We can cold head them where other places have not been able to. We also, in some cases, like titanium, we will do warm heading, where we put a heater in front of the cold heading equipment and heat the material up as it's going into the header. So we can make it more pliable. And titanium is a material that just doesn't like to move around without splitting. So it's better if you heat it up in order to head it. But we don't want to overheat the material. Because you lose too many of the properties that you gain through cold forging. Materials have a grain, and you want the grain to follow those forms that you've put into a part, and that makes them stronger. Do you understand that concept?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's a little difficult to explain.
No, this is
good
stuff.
This is awesome.
Wow.
That's why we're quiet. We're listening.
Difficult to explain without props. But you can see where cold heading at 35 to 40 parts a minute is a lot more cost effective than hot heading at a couple of minutes apart. Not to mention all the things, the cutoff, the deburring, the chamfering that had to be done prior to. And also you have to normalize the parts. You have to put them through a heat cycle to normalize the stresses that built up during that hot heading. And you also have to do some additional machining, deburring and descaling and different things to that hot pitted part also, just to get to the point of where it would be similar to the cold headed part before it moves on to the actual heat treatment process. So it's a much costlier, much more time-consuming way to do things. So we like to cold head when we can because it's a lot more cost-effective. But we do hot heading where we have to. So.
With all the machinery that you guys have, do you guys have like an in-house metrology department that keeps everything calibrated and adjusted and
Yes,
on?
we have an in-house. Well, we are AS 9100 certified. We are also QA 9001 certified. We also have people that do in-house certification of all of our tools and various things all the time. And we also have an outside source that comes in and does certification as well. And then we have to go through a review process 2 to 3 times a year for our quality programs by an outside source. And we're doing our own internal audits once a month, basically.
Wow.
So there's a lot of that going on. Now we have also our own in-house inspection labs and testing labs, and every product that goes through our place from start to finish, every process has to be signed off and bought from quality control from one process before it can move to the next. And then it has to go through a final inspection after the product is finished. Now there's an average of about 30 to 32 processes per part during the manufacturing process. Wow. So there's a lot of inspection going on these parts all the way through their manufacturing. Also, when we set up a thread roller and we're going to roll a critical part, connecting rod bolts or any critical parts, we take that part in after the thread roller is set up. The first part that the operator considers as a good part, he has to take it in and we destructive test it and make sure it meets a minimum amount of cycles before he can run that job.
How long does the destructive portion take? Is it a couple of days, or is it done within a shift?
It's hours, basically. Okay. Within a shift. I mean, we have more machines than we have operators, so that's a good thing. We don't want that operator standing around all day with nothing to do. But yeah, it can take 4 or 5 hours.
Man, wow.
I'm kind of speechless here. It's like, holy crap! I had no idea. I honestly had no idea what was involved.
I'd love to go and watch that whole process.
You guys are welcome to come down.
That would be so
take
awesome.
A tour anytime.
Outstanding.
And that goes out to your listeners as well, viewers, listeners, whatever. Just give us a heads up. Say, I'm going to be in town on this day. Can I get a tour of the plant? We'll be happy to accommodate you.
What we need now is a round 6 bus.
Like a TMC bus?
I'm seeing this working out.
An old English double-decker?
No, yes. An old VW bus.
That.
Holds like 5 people,
Yeah.
All of our listeners.
Most of the people that come to see us and take the tour, they'll come in and, man, you guys, your bolts are so expensive, Why do they cost so much?
Yeah, follow me.
To the tour, and without fail, the comments always after the tour is, "Gosh, how can you guys make that stuff so cheap?"
Yeah.
I kid you not. It's a true story.
That answered. I can't say thanks enough. You answered so many questions in that little amount of time. That was awesome. And awesome is just a horrible word to use for that, but it's all I've got right now.
It is an awesome thing, especially to see it in practice. It's truly awesome is the word. So I know it sounds a little hokey, but that's true. It truly is awesome. So,
and I love the fact that you're still as excited about what you do every day. After just being around it, you think, the average person might think, okay, well, you get kind of, what's the word? Everything would kind of become pedestrian to you,
No, I don't get jaded. I tell you, I love my job. I truly love my job. And if I can do it another 42 years, I will.
I certainly hope you can. I mean, I'd like you to find some time to go on vacation too. You know, we can stop by with the bus and take you somewhere.
So you're welcome to stop by anytime, guys.
So the big question now is, okay, I know you guys do advertising, but the funny part to me is, and I was trying to wrap my head around this when we were planning to have you on, is with a product like yours, you could run just standard advertising. You know, hey, here's a picture of our bolts, here's things like that. You're kind of in a unique position, especially with all of your motorsports involvement, where you can show literally your product in action in a print ad by just showing that, hey, your fasteners have been used on this particular car that won this race or this series. And that, to me, it just strikes me as amazing, because your advertising is almost handled for you by the very people who purchase your parts.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. Our best salespeople are our customers, and we've been very fortunate over the years that they continue to let us advertise the fact that they do use our product. And hero ads are great, but sometimes you have to just get to the nuts and bolts of the thing too. So
nicely played.
So we do both. We still do hero ads, and they are very effective. But sometimes you really just have to go into detail and explain to people what you're doing as well. So we do some of both.
And I think that's awesome. And it's weird too, because you've got a product that really, I mean, it wouldn't translate super well to like film. Like, say you get into a series like The Fast and the Furious or some kind of a movie series like that, where if you were selling turbochargers, superchargers, body kits, or vinyl stick-on graphics, something like that, where you could have that show up on screen, it would be really tough to have a lot of product placement. I was trying to figure this out in my head, because I'm always thinking about the marketing behind things. It's my
a lot of
in life.
is bought advertising, to tell you the truth, and that's one thing that we won't do for our advertising is we won't buy our way into somebody saying that they run our product on their vehicle. They either agree to let us say that or they don't. It's really that simple. A lot of that stuff you see on, say, a Fast and Furious, where you see a royal purple or whatever, they've paid for that advertising to be on there.
Right. So there's no hope of watching a lead character, walk across and suddenly spill a bag of bolts. my ARP bolts.
So
my Wavelock bolts.
A lot of money for that. And there are race teams that want a lot of money for that too. There's one particular NASCAR team that, after 12 straight years of some sponsorship involvement with them, where we were giving them, a bit of product and selling them a bit of product, and after 12 years of that arrangement with them, they decided all of a sudden that they wanted, in order to keep our decal on their car, they wanted a minimum of $250,000 per year per car, and all the product to be free. And we said no, thank you. And they says, okay, well, that catalog you just printed 200,000 copies of, you better get our cars off of them, or we're going to sue you. So we had to throw that whole run of catalogs out that were less than a month old and reprint them.
Too bad you couldn't just do like a retrofit where you send out a sticker or a decal. It's on page 32, please insert this on the top half of the page.
Well, unfortunately, it wasn't just in the guts, it was also in the cover. So,
or those car ads, where the car's not available, it says out for a bath.
They were playing hardball, So they hired some marketing guru, whatever, to come in, and he was playing hardball with us. But it really soured us on the whole relationship with them, unfortunately. And
I'm sorry.
And it had an issue going forward for some time. It all worked out over the years, but but we've never got back to that relationship we did have with them, which is sad. I mean, for them, not just us. I think it's really sad for them as well, because I think the relationship we had with them was really beneficial to their team.
And that's kind of the thing, and to kind of use that as a springboard into a couple other questions I have. To me, any relationship, personal or professional, is always worth far more than a dollar figure. And,
Absolutely.
And that should be, you'd think that would be a given, especially, you get into the hot rod world where I think everyone kind of gets to know everybody, and there's always a certain amount of camaraderie, and it's almost like a family type thing. And, so that kind of leads me to this now, because you've had some pretty cool cars over the years. And I need to ask, how did you get into hot rods, custom cars, street machines, all the fun stuff?
I grew up in a town called Wentzville, Missouri. And in this little town of Wentzville, Missouri, was a track called MAR, or Mid-America Raceway. And this little track, back in the mid-'60s, had a lot of match racing going on there. And there were guys like Butch Leal and Arnie Beswick and all these guys coming through there, and with their their factory altered race cars, factory altered stock cars, basically, the AFX stuff and the super stock stuff. And I just got hooked. I had 3 uncles at the time that were racing out there, and they were all racing Oldsmobiles, and they had these big, full-bodied, heavier than heck Oldsmobiles, and they had the front ends all jacked up on them for weight transfer. And I was out there with them, but I wasn't really out there to watch them race. I wanted to see the factory super stocks and the AFX cars and stuff go down the track, and it really hooked me. And I just had to figure out some way to be involved in the racing industry ever since I was 6. I think I started going out to MAR when I was 6 years old.
Whoa. Wow. Been a while.
So what brought you from Missouri to Southern California?
The Beach Boys, the Mamas and the Papas, Jan and Dean, et cetera, et cetera. They were all telling me how wonderful California was.
Can we pay you to say the Round 6 bus?
The Round 6 bus.
So you actually lived the whole. I heard Beach Boys songs. It planted the vision in your head, and you went for it.
So, yeah, absolutely.
At what age did you?
We had also a famous musician that owned half of the town there. His name was Chuck Berry, by the way.
Oh, jeez,
never heard of him.
Yeah. I went to school with 2 of his boys. Yeah.
Well, so okay, now I went through kind of a similar thing. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and grew tired of snow and cold and everything like that. And I made the shift out to California, and I did that in my 20s. At what age did you make the jump?
I was actually real young. I my first time that I came to California on my own, I was 14.
Whoa.
And even though I was 14, I looked 10. So that didn't last a week. I was picked up and sent back. But the second time I came out and made it stick, I was 17.
Whoa. Oh, my God. Okay, so
and the bird's
questions.
Excited, too, obviously.
Sorry about that, guys. I don't know where the microphone is, or I'd try to at least block some of the sound.
I kind of like this. This gives it a whole new atmosphere. We're gonna tell people we're live from. What did you say earlier, Alex? We are the Enchanted Tiki Room in Disneyland.
The Enchanted Tiki Room at Disneyland.
Wait for Don Ho to kick in just a second. He's gonna do a little serenade.
Yeah.
Hey, knock it off. They listen to me sometimes.
Oh, I was like, wait, I'm so used to hearing that in my life. I thought you were talking to me.
Yeah,
was
I
like,
got
can do
quiet
that.
all of a sudden.
I got quiet. I was scared. Get yelled at.
So you get out to California at 17, man. How do you? Wow.
Well, I started washing dishes and whatever I could do to support myself at the time.
Right.
But not long. I mean, I wasn't even 18. I went to work for a company that sold plumbing supply. Boy, I can talk tonight. That sold plumbing supplies wholesale, and I went to work as a salesman in training. And by the time I was 18, I was out on the road on my own, and I had 238 accounts in California, Arizona, and Nevada. And I had to call on all those accounts at least once a month. And the bigger ones like Superior and Familia and et cetera, I had to call on once a week. So I was on the road all the time. I never even really saw my apartment. I kept an apartment, but it was just to keep my stuff in. And I'd go there if I was lucky once a month and trade out stuff. But for the most part, I was having stuff cleaned by, dry cleaners on a day-to-day basis, and on the road all the time. Now, I got supplied a company vehicle and a per diem, and I had expense money, and I made good money doing that. I was actually making 12.5% commission plus a salary on my biggest line, which was a patented product that nobody else had, by Mission Clay Pipe. And it was connectors that you could connect, say, 4-inch clay pipe to 2-inch steel pipe or cast iron pipe. So you can imagine how popular that would be in the plumbing industry. And it was a patented product that nobody else had. It sold itself. But I'd like to think that I did a pretty good job of selling it too. Anyway, after 2 years of doing that, I was just totally burnt out. And so then I started doing some, marketing sales, whatever, of Country Time Lemonade and various other products. You guys probably remember that, the stuff you mix with water.
Uh-huh.
So I was going to supermarkets and I was setting up, talking them into setting up end caps in the stores, because these were new products that hadn't really been to marketplace yet. So I'm setting up these end caps in stores with the, Country Time Lemonade and various other products. And I was doing that when I met the founder. And then I went to work for ARP.
I was going to ask you, since you came out here, and obviously you like the California stuff, did you start building cars right away, or did that take you a while to kind of get motivated, or what was your deal as far as the hot rod stuff goes?
When I was tired of being on the road all the time, I got a Honda CB754, and that was my first hot rod, so to speak. I did it all cafe racer style with drop bars and everything. And at the time, I was living in Huntington Beach, California, and I spent about, 3 or 4 months goofing off, hanging around a bunch of other like-minded guys, and some of them killed themselves, and some were paralyzed, and I went down 4 different occasions. And I finally realized this is stupid, and quit riding. I haven't ridden since. And I bought a 68 Satellite with a 383 and automatic, and that was my first real hot rod car. My first car was when I was 17, when I came out to California. I bought a Ford Cortina.
Ooh, kind of cool.
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
Yeah, I bought it for $500. I sold it for $500. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I drove the piss out of it. But I really liked my satellite, and then I spun an engine bearing or something. I think I spun an engine bearing is what it was, and I went. There was a local auto dealer, car auto dealer, about a block and a half from where I live. So I walked over there, and he wanted 2,000, I think $300 for a 69 Roadrunner, 383 4-speed that was just cherry, sitting on his lot, and I talked him down to $1,500 for it.
Nicely done.
Wow.
I had to threaten to leave twice, but I got him talked down to $1,500. I walked out the door with the title and keys in hand and drove off the lot. And that was a great car. I loved that car a lot. And odd story. When let's see, about 1982, when we moved from Van Nuys to Canoga Park, Van Nuys was the second location that ARP was at when I was working there. To Canoga Park, the third location. I had no place to put the car. I left it in the backyard because I had no place to put it. And also the founder's son had a 1969 440 GTX that he left there for the same reason. A bit sad. Anyway, I've had a variety of muscle cars. My first real show-worthy car was one that I built in 1998 and took on Hot Rod Power Tour, and it was a 70.5 Camaro with a 502 fuel-injected big block. And Hot Rod
car
magazine approached me as soon as I got back from Power Tour and said they'd like to give me the December 98 cover, and I wanted to know what I thought of that, and I asked them if they were kidding, and they said no. So that was my first real show-worthy and magazine-worthy car that I built. And I did that myself in-house with some of the guys, from ARP. A lot of the guys from ARP actually helped me put that together. And it was all done in-house, including the painting, believe it or not. And Kenny Duttweiler built the motor for it.
One of my heroes.
Yeah, one of mine too. So, yeah, that was my first one. And then the June issue of Street Rodder magazine, your viewers may have seen. I had my 57 Ford wagon on the cover, and also an article in there. And that was my first real wake up to having somebody build a car for me, and everything that it entails, from cost to level of detail to quality of product in the end. It's just amazing.
Well, that car is a work of art from one end to the other.
Yeah, it truly is. It truly is. But along with works of art, you usually end up paying for works of art. So, but being the sick puppy I am, I didn't learn my lesson, and I'm having another project start right now. So.
Well, that's awesome. See, the wagon, I was fortunate enough, where you had the thing, a lot of the metal work done and had it painted. I was down there all the time. So I watched the whole transformation over the years time it was down there getting the metal work done. I watched the whole thing happen.
And there was a bunch of metal work done.
Oh,
and people don't really realize it because it's done so well that you just don't know that anything's changed. You know it looks better, but you don't know why.
Yeah, it's
all too often, guys, start doing metal work on cars, and they end up with something that's gaudy and looks out of place. We really wanted to keep it all Ford design language, and I think that was the best decision in the end. So,
yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. I even got to do a little work on that car, which was kind of fun, kind of an honor.
Yes, you did, and I'm very honored. And you did something really special for me on the tailgate, which was a little tribute to Pete Chaporis, who was also an integral part of the design and how that car came about. And unfortunately, we lost Pete last January, and I was truly not this last January, the January before. Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
So it was a huge, devastating loss to me, because unfortunately I just met Pete over the year that my car was having all the body work done on it. But we became fast friends, and it felt like we knew each other for a lifetime. Pete was a very unique individual.
I met Pete in 85 or 86, somewhere around there. I did a bunch of work for him when he lived up on the mountain up in Crestline, so I knew Pete a long time.
I wished I had, but
great
again,
guy.
I mean, it felt like I knew him a lifetime during the course of that year, and Pete's been a big loss to me. But Brad, you did a very nice thing in doing a little tribute on the tailgate of the wagon for me there, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, sir, very much. Thank you for letting me be involved with it. I mean, that was
my honor.
Cool project.
Yeah, my honor. We had so much talent involved in that thing. Just some of the best in the industry. I am so honored that all the people that came together on the car did. I can't even. Just the best of the best, and they were all great. Mick from Mix Paints, Joey Angelo did a lot of the body modifications, and he worked for Mick at the time. He's doing his own thing now as a contractor, but he's still associated with Mick in that he's leasing some space from him. And Rick, gosh, my mind's a blank.
Lefevre.
Rick Lefevre. He is a welding god.
He is a guru.
He is an amazing individual. He did things that I would have never thought could be possibly done. The Sill Plates, which seems not to be an important thing, but it was so important to me to keep this thing. I didn't want any billet pieces. I didn't want any aftermarket pieces, so to speak, on the majority of this car. I mean, the only thing that's really aftermarket is some of the, the engine is a Boss 9, so it's not an original Boss 429. It's made by John Causey, who used to be Dino Don Nicholson's crew chief, and John's just an amazing guy. But so I'm using his engine, and I've got the Borla fuel injection on it, the 8-stack fuel injection. And then I've got the billet wheels. But for the most part, this thing is all Ford parts for the most part. Anyway, so the Sill Plates, they are 20 thousandths thick aluminum. And Rick Lefevre took 2 Sill Plates for each side, cut them, so that they could be lengthened, because we lengthened the door like almost 6 inches. So we had to lengthen the Sill Plates as well because we moved the door jamb back and everything. And he welded together these 20 thousandths thick aluminum Sill Plates, and you couldn't even tell where they were welded together. I mean, this guy is amazing. Not to mention we had to lengthen all the trim and everything. So, but
the
Rick,
trim is what I was impressed with. I saw the trim, I was like, dude, it's like welding up a beer can. I don't even know how I did that.
Well, that was stainless steel. I mean, but 20 thousandths thick aluminum. He had to build a whole special heat sink and everything else for this. It just impressed the heck out of me. But Rick had come to me before he started doing some test stuff on the Sill Plates, and he says, "Look, this is going to cost you a fortune. You could I know a guy over here that will make you these billet sill plates and this and that. And I said, Rick, look at the car. Look at the car. You know, in for a dime, in for a dollar. I says, you know, you got to do this. You got to do it. So Rick made it happen, and I can't thank him enough. And Tony Thacker was involved a lot in the design of the car. Steve Strope and I would go out there almost on a weekly basis, and we'd go out and have lunch, and we'd go out with Phil, and we'd go out with Tony, and we'd go out with Joey and Mick, and then there was I can't remember his name now. Anyway, there were a lot of people of our industry where we go out and we just sit down and have lunch, and we'd start deciding the direction of the car and where it was going to go and how it was going to end up. And I'm just very fortunate that I had the people involved that I did on this thing. Can't say enough about them.
Awesome. It definitely shows. I mean, that car is that thing's it's a graduate degree in finesse and subtlety. The thing's awesome.
I thank you very much. That means a lot to me. I appreciate it. So my next project is going to be a lot simpler and a lot less expensive. But building a truck. It's a 67 Chevrolet C10 truck. And we're putting in a 67 Corvette 435 horse 427 drivetrain.
Yeah,
I've got date coated block heads, date coated tri-power unit, date coated M22 rock crusher. I've got a date coated C2 rear suspension. I've also got the cross members that the C2 suspension bolts up to, and actually the frame rails of a Corvette that had front end damage. So he cut the frame rails and those cross members out and sent me that whole bit. So this is going to be a real neat piece. It's all date coated. It's all date. That's
awesome.
Wow.
And you know, I just want to make it look like you know, Moss and some of the other engineers got together in '67 and decided to build themselves a shop truck.
Very cool.
And nothing runs like a 427. Those things are magical. They are an amazing engine.
And I've already had offers from a couple of guys that are now making 2-barrel fuel injection systems to fuel inject it. And I said, no, that strays away from the whole the whole premise of the project. No, it's carbureted. Sorry. I thank you very much for offering, but so Mick's going to be doing the paint and body work. I located a C10 in Atlanta, Georgia area, short wheelbase, big window, and it's got the original paint on the exterior. Although they did repaint the bed because it got beat up pretty good, I guess, along the way. They repaint the inside of the bed. They've gone through the whole thing. The whole chassis has all been gone through and repainted. And the underhood, the engine's been revamped, and everything under the hood is repainted. So it's a nice, you know, one of those patina things, which I hate, by the way. I think if you're going to build a proper project, paint the thing. Come on, paint the thing. Quit trotting this junk out there with modern underpinnings. I'm sorry, that's just my feelings. Anyway, so you know, this is a truck that's already worthy of somebody taking out and taking the car shows or whatever and showing as a patina project. But that's my starting point on this, and I must say I got a very good deal on it. But more importantly, I was just happy to come up with an unmolested example of a big window short wheelbase 67 C10, which are hard to come by.
Yeah.
And when you do find them, they're usually pretty expensive. So
Yeah, 67 and 68 are the best looking front ends of that generation of 67,
I think
72.
so too.
They're the best looking ones.
Yeah. And it just plays into everything had to be 67 on this to make it work. And it's another thing from the mind of Steve Strope, the master. The master. I like how this guy's mind works.
So is this going to be more like a road race looking truck kind of thing?
No. Basically, everything on the thing is going to be basically as it could have been done in 67. I'm not putting coilovers on it. I'm going to run the transverse leaf spring in the rear and the whole thing. And the only thing that's really going to be aftermarket on the truck is the torque thrust wheels.
Awesome.
And it'll be silver blue, which was a Corvette color, and it's going to have a red gut. And I'm retaining the bench seat, but I'm going to have Gabe's do the interior. And we're going to do it in the actual Corvette red, but in leather, not in vinyl. And we'll contour the bench seats to mimic the bucket seats of the Corvette. Mm-hmm. We're going to use that chrome T-handle reverse lockout gear shift lever knob. And all the gauges will be redone with the Corvette fonts and to give it a Corvette look. But I don't want to put a Corvette dash in per se. Just the gauges I want it to look like or mimic.
Very nice. Bonus points though if you mount the Corvette radio
straight up and down vertically.
Unfortunately, there's not enough room for that because I am going to put air conditioning in it because that's just a pet peeve of mine. I do like my air conditioning, so
awesome.
So there won't be enough room to put the vertical radio in. Although that was a thought. That was a thought. But I'm not going to do a console either. I'm going to do a floor shift. So we're probably going to have to modify that shifter a bit, which, I know somebody with a machine shop. So.
Oh, yeah. So you've got access to some pretty talented people that way.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be an issue. Although I can't help but think, though, going back to the patina thing, the market you might be missing out on by not offering, patina bolts.
Yeah.
No.
They already come rusty.
Oh yeah, that'd go over real well.
Had paint overspray on them. Oh yeah, I think it's a huge market.
Maybe rust. No.
Oh, great with that.
Well, it's fake rust though. It's simulated rust. You can come up with a process, simu rust. You can proprietary.
Lovely guys. No royalties here now.
Shoot then. Okay.
Get rid of those silly 12 points and put 6 points all over.
We'll just go back to China and work with that company. Was it RAP?
Yeah, they'll listen.
I think that's gonna be great.
Yeah.
ALP or whatever.
Well, outstanding. I would love to have you back, sir, if you'd be interested.
Oh, anytime, guys.
Yeah, when you started talking tech, I was mesmerized. That's awesome. That's
okay. Well,
right up my alley.
I think we didn't lose any audience members. Sometimes that can get to be a snooze, especially without props. With props, hey, it's really great. Don't get me wrong. It's really great stuff, but it can get to be a snooze without the props. I hope everyone.
It was fascinating. I can't say thank you enough. You presented it in a great way. I'm more than happy.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
And that's what we base everything on here. Is Brian happy?
Brian's happy.
Brian happy. There you
it's
go.
It's all about Brian.
If Brian's happy, it's all good.
Thank you again, sir. Very much.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Bob.
Yes, it was very much my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys. I really enjoyed it.
We've been looking forward to
and
this.
I do enjoy your broadcast. I am now a fan. For whatever reason, I didn't know about you until recently, but after listening to some of your broadcasts, I am very much a fan. So,
thank you. We kept kind of a low profile after Alex's appearance in Playgirl.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. I didn't want that to interfere. You know, it was my lifelong dream, and you know, it was
You and Burt Reynolds, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, that's the funny part. That issue is Alex and Burt Reynolds. It's kind of weird.
Yeah,
It's awkward,
yeah.
but
Yeah. On the fur rug. Yeah, of course.
All right, guys. Well, anytime.
All right.
I'm proud to be associated with you, and
Wow.
and happy to do this broadcast.
We as well.
likewise,
All right.
thank you so much. I'm
Thank you
humbled.
again, sir.
I truly appreciate this. I had a great time. And just let me know whenever you want to do something again. Let me know. I'll be happy to participate.
And I'm seriously thinking I would love to come up and tour the facility.
Please
That
do.
sort of stuff just
I was dead
gets me
serious.
spinning, man.
What I told you for you and your viewers. I mean, as long as you give us a couple of days notice saying you're going to be around and could we give you a tour, we'll be happy to accommodate.
See, Alex and I are just going to show up. Hey, where's Bob?
What? Yeah.
He said we got a tour and he's buying us lunch. What?
Yeah,
Wait, what?
you know. Yeah.
All right, guys.
Hey, go have a great evening, and we'll talk to you soon.
And likewise. Take care.
Have a great
Bye,
night, sir.
Bob.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, that was beyond anything we were expecting coming into this one, man. We got a great mixture of tech. So, Alex, I know that was like right up your alley, man.
Man, it was so much fun. I mean, I was digging it. It was fun. And to listen to him, you know what's so great about Bob? He's a marketing guy. And sometimes when you're around some folks in the industry, the marketing guys really aren't technical guys. So here's a guy that knows the marketing side, and he can answer every question you need. He knows all the processes. It was phenomenal. So I'll bet you in the industry when he's kind of working with some clients, they're probably a little surprised that the marketing guy is on his game.
Well, I like the fact that he said he started at the bottom, so he learned
Yeah.
all the equipment.
Yep.
You go, okay, there's my hero because he knows the company inside.
Yep, exactly. And then, and like you said, there's, starting at the bottom is, sometimes it's a tough one to swallow when you're that young kid and you want to move up. But I tell you, it sure helped Bob learn every facet of that business.
And that goes right back to one of the things we always talk about. It's being able to talk the talk and walk the walk.
Yeah.
And obviously, this guy he's the real deal.
Yeah. And that's not always common, in the civilian industry. Sometimes you get a guy, he's the greatest marketing guy in the world, but he doesn't know anything about the technical stuff. He knows what he read on his PowerPoint, but man, he could sell an Eskimo a deep freezer.
Right.
But yeah, so or and vice versa. Sometimes you can get those guys that are just brilliant minds. They just don't have the ability to sell their product. They just don't have that capability.
Or if you go vice versa, sometimes you have an Eskimo come in and sell you, an ice cream sandwich.
Yeah.
So
an Eskimo selling you a fireplace insert.
solar powered. So cool. Let's we'll close this one out tonight in typical fashion. Thank you, Bob, for your time and your insight, and man, for expanding my brain and hopefully yours.
Yeah.
As always at the end here, I would like to just say I'm still Brian, but I'm a better Brian now.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a much smarter Brad, which really isn't saying anything because that wasn't much to start with. But yes.
Yeah, and I'm Alex, and I'm still buzzing from learning about bolts.
No doubt.
Well, awesome. Hopefully you guys out there had as much fun as we did and got as much out of this. Obviously, there'll be much more on this on the website, and we'll start a Patreon account soon to start building the Round 6 bus with all of those patina bolts. So
Simurust.
It's a trademark.
I own it.
Simurust is a trademark of Round 6 Productions. Okay, so in any event, thank you again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.
Bye. Thanks again for listening, and be sure to keep up with us Gearheads over on our website at www.round6pod.com. And if you'd like to, we invite you to follow along with us over on Facebook, Instagram, and be sure to check out all of our latest videos on youtube.com. It'll be a combination of Love Boat and like Monster Garage meets overhauling, where we get a hold of a like an old decommissioned aircraft carrier, and we load up all these builders onto this thing, and for a week they go on a cruise, but they have to build a car to race at whatever location they show up at each time, only using things that are available on the boat.
Oh, nice.
See?
I like that.
Yeah, that isn't bad. That isn't a bad.
And the
idea.
loser has to drive off the end of the deck.
or they leave them behind in the place that they went to.
They leave them behind.
Hey,
Then he has to build a boat out of the same car. That